Thank you for joining me on today's episode. We're going to cover how I make goose breakfast sausage with an Italian flair. I'll show you some tips and tricks along the way. So the first step, we will be portioning the seasonings. I have a recipe card at the end of the video that covers what you see on the plate, as well as the extra seasonings added during the QC, which is the quality control segment in the middle of the video. On to step number 2. You want to take your clean dry attachments for your grinder, put your worm drive into the casing, put your plate on top of that. Underneath your plate, you're going to be putting your blade. You want to screw everything together tight. You want to take your grinder and put it in the refrigerator or freezer. I didn't have enough room in my freezer, so I had to stick it in my fridge. But preferably, if you have room, put it in your freezer. Moving on to step 3, we're going to assemble the protein and the fat. So the protein is the goose meat. It's goose breast. I think in this recipe was about 2 1/3 pounds of goose breast. I also have pork, which is ground pork, and pork belly. I couldn't find pork butt. I'll get into that later, so this is what I have. I want to cube the meat and the fat. I want to try and keep it ice cold as well. The reason we're trying to keep the meat and the fat so cold is when we grind everything with a grinder, it causes friction. Friction causes heat. So what's going to happen is the fat is going to start to melt and it's going to render out, and it'll change your fat to protein ratio. That you want to keep about 40%. The video doesn't show it too well, but when I was cubing the goose, it is mostly frozen. It was only pulled out of the freezer about an hour before I started slicing. That's why it was a little bit difficult to cube and slice through. All right, pay attention to my hands and my fingers as I'm mixing this up. And as I initially start to grind, you're actually going to see a good example of what happens to the fat just in the process of mixing and it just starting to warm. You'll see my hands get a little bit greasy, and you'll see it on the grinder plate on the top here where the wooden dowel is. So when I first started with this episode, I really wanted to acquire a pork shoulder, a pork butt to do this recipe with, to trim the fat and show all those pieces to you about the proportions, but I couldn't find it, so I had to throw an audible, and I wound up using the sliced pork belly and the ground pork. All in all, I just showing you that improvising, as long as you keep an open mind, can pretty much attain what you want to in the end. You just have to think it through and be a little flexible. So I want to backtrack a little bit. When I cubed the meat, I also cubed the pork belly, and the reason being is I was using the coarse ground plate, and I only wanted to grind this once. I didn't want to double grind or do a fine grind, so I didn't want the bacon, aka the pork belly, I didn't want that to become stringy and possibly slide behind the knife and be stringy in the sausage as you eat it. So that's why I was just double checking and making sure everything would grind nicely. So you should mix everything and incorporate all the seasoning throughout the protein and fat. Make sure it goes. It took me about 5 minutes to mix everything. Here you see I'm doing my first quality control test. I took a little section of the sausage, I put it in a little bit of butter, and it's just a taste. You don't want to make all the patties and find out that it's not properly seasoned. So here I realized I needed a little bit more salt and some nutmeg and definitely more sage. Sage is one of the most predominant flavors in sausage, especially breakfast sausage. So in my breakfast sausage, I like to add fennel seed because I like the flavor, but keep in mind that adding fennel seed, that technically would make it a sweet Italian sausage. So if you add too much, keep this in mind when you cook other recipes you like in the future. You can steer it towards Italian cooking. Bottom line, after you do your quality control and you adjust the seasonings, don't over season. Adjust it as many times as you need, adding little bits of seasoning at a time till you get it perfectly, until it makes you happy with the taste that you're tasting. Once you get it to the place you want and the flavors and you really like it, then you are ready to go ahead and start portioning. I like it easier with plastic wrap on both bottom and top of the portions while they freeze. That way it's just easier to take off. It doesn't stick to the pan, and it's one less thing to clean up. I'm using a 1.5 ounce scoop to make my patties. Then I'm going to, once I'm all done, I'm going to stick them in the freezer, harden. I'm not going to keep them in the flat shape. I'm going to keep them in a round ball shape because for me that'll be easier to store in the freezer. And plus, once they thaw and if they get tossed around, you don't use it immediately that morning. Just by moving it around, you can lose the shape of the patty. So I really don't bother until just before I actually cook it. With this now being done, I'll put a piece of plastic over top of it and I will stick it in the freezer. And then guess what? It's time to make a breakfast sandwich. So get your coffee ready, stick your English muffin in the toaster, and let's make breakfast. So basically my sandwich, I like to fry an egg, add a little salt and pepper, put some sharp cheddar cheese on it, a little bit of ketchup, stick the sausage on top, and have at it. I actually pulled 2 sausages in this clip here. I was going to cook breakfast for myself and my son, but I didn't realize he had already gone to work, and he switched days. So this was actually Saturday morning, and I thought I was doing a good thing, but he ate it the next day anyway. All right, I'm going to wrap this narration up. I just want to say thank you so much for sticking with me. I'm trying different formats on how I do the videos, so please let me know in the comments which style you actually prefer as you go through so I can be a little bit more consistent. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out what you guys like and what's easy to do. So again, thanks for sticking with me. At least I hope this episode encourages you to try and make your own breakfast sausage and make it a cut above everybody else's. Oh, and remember, it also doesn't have to be straight goose meat. If you don't have any, or if you don't have a lot, you can substitute any of the wild games that you would have: venison, elk, pheasant. It really doesn't matter. It'll all make a good sausage. The pork fat will help keep it moist. Yeah, with that being said, we're gonna get ready to eat our sandwich here. It's in the final throes of being made. While we're waiting, if you please don't mind, if you like this episode, please share it with a friend that you think would also like it. It would help me out a lot. So I'm thinking maybe on one of the next episodes coming up, I might try and tackle an actual like classical dish, maybe a chicken marsala or something to that effect. Maybe in a game recipe, but maybe just classical with either a chicken or something. I don't know. Let me know. Reach out and tell me what you want to see next. All right. That's all I had to say on that one. See you all next week on the next episode.